Okay, this should be the third and final part, hopefully, because it's late. But I want to get all this done. And obviously we're going over this on Monday. Or the parts we haven't gone over. So to finish this off, hopefully in under an hour. Hopefully a lot under an hour, but if you're looking at the slides, it's we're doing the Fort Trumbull case study example, and then we'll tie some things together with the key component of racism. Okay, so Fort Trumbull. So there's this place, it's known as Connecticut, and in Connecticut there's this city, and this city is called New London. Open. New London, Connecticut is located on, if you can imagine this, the Thames River, not unlike Google Maps, not unlike the London in England. There's a big difference between London, England, and New London, Connecticut. Unlike London, England, which is huge and economically vibrant and has a long history and stuff, New London, Connecticut has about 28,000-ish people that live there. It has that access to the Thames River, and it's seen as being in a really good economic location. If you look at a map of where it is located, you will see that it's got a great area for, port that then leads out nice and peacefully into the Atlantic Ocean, so shipping and all that stuff would be really great. However, over the past 40-ish, 50-ish years, New London has experienced stagnant population, a little bit of population decline, stagnant growth. It's been called economically distressed. So that's a little bit about the city. 28,000 people, known, called economically distressed, kind of blue-collar, northeastern town. But it's got this sort of geographic resource, the river that leads to Atlantic, that can supposedly, push it through and make it awesome. Anyway, so we have New London. We're looking at a controversy at Fort Trumbull in New London. So what's Fort Trumbull? It's a neighborhood, blue-collar neighborhood. There are a couple pictures of it on the website, or on the PowerPoint slides right now, 46 and 47. It's located on this south of the city center, on this jutting out piece of land, if that makes sense. There's a fort there, if you can imagine. And it's a regular working class neighborhood, at the very least. However, if you look at the photos, look at where it's located, you can say, hey. Sorry, I'm going to check again real quick, make sure my microphone's on. Okay, yeah. Hey, you know what? This is near the river. It's near a historic site. Rich people like to live near rivers. Businesses like to set up in picturesque water areas, I bet you this blue-collar neighborhood can be made to be more expensive, and the land value to be more expensive. So, there was a little bit of a discussion, a disagreement. The city moved to describe the neighborhood as blighted. A blighted neighborhood is a poor neighborhood, one with a lot of maybe empty or vacant homes, a lot of poverty, a lot of maybe not kept up homes, condemned homes. They even said that there might be some crack homes in there. Once you start talking about blighted homes and blighted communities and crack homes, you start to wonder, hey, is this neighborhood even filled with good people? Hardworking people here, or are they scum? So the city wanted to call this area blighted, okay? Because if they could say it was blighted, it was underdeveloped, then that would give them a reason to take the land and develop it for something else, and also do it theoretically for a little cheaper. I guess to back up, people don't know, the government has this power of eminent domain. It's in one of the amendments, like the 5th or 4th, 5th, 6th, something like that. Essentially, it says the government can come in and take your property. However, there are rules they have to follow to do it by. They have to have a good reason for doing it, some sort of legitimate public use. They have to pay you fair market value, generally a little more than fair market value. And it can't be indiscriminate. Let's see. Theoretically, at least. So, generally we think of a government using their power of eminent domain, their power to take private property for public use or for the government, and then pay the citizens for the land they took, to build roads or to expand roads, build bridges, build waterways, to build parks. Usually we think of it as some public use like that, okay? When they take your land, they don't have to take all of it. Oftentimes, like if you live on a 2-lane street and they want to expand it to a 4-lane street, and you live in a house and it's got a front yard, they'll just take as much of the front yard as they need, and they'll pay you the fair market plus slightly a little bit land value for the land that they took from you. Excuse me. So, but to do that, part of the idea is they have to show that it's necessary that they take the land, that the land, at least in this case, in New London, that the neighborhood, the places where the people lived in Fort Trumbull, could be put to better use. And I have on the slide here another, I guess, reinforcer, waterfront property. This is waterfront property. Usually that's can be more expensive property, but you have homes there that are worth only $150-ish thousand maybe, when theoretically you could build homes there because of its location and its scenic views for $500,000. Saying if you have a home worth $500,000, you get more property taxes from that versus a $150,000 home. Anyway, bit of background, bit of an idea of maybe where this is going. That so you can see where Fort Trumbull is. Okay, so here's what happened. All right, the key players and background, what the story's about. Pfizer is they're a medical drug company. They announced that they want to build a new medical, what they call research campuses. It'd be a large medical facility. It'll staff lots of smart people who are doing, testing drugs and, well, that kind of essentially doing all science stuff. And they'll build this big research campus. It'll attract, and they said they'll build it in New London. It'll attract construction will happen, so people will be employed through construction, which will be good for the city. It'll attract high-paying jobs. High-paying jobs are great. And so having more high-paying jobs in the city would be a big deal to New London to help it not become so economically sucky. Similar to Mississippi. Har, har, har. So that was Pfizer's sort of statement, their idea. New London, though, looked at this and said, hey, if Pfizer's coming in and building this big medical complex, we should take advantage of that, and I might sneeze. Sorry. They did not say they might sneeze. New London said that Pfizer's coming in, they're building this big medical complex, or this big campus, that's going to employ, a bunch of new, highly educated, highly skilled, highly paid people. What if we planned development around the campus to complement the new expensive Pfizer thing? And since Pfizer was building in the Fort Trumbull neighborhood, the idea was, why don't we level all the homes in the Fort Trumbull neighborhood and build more expensive apartment complexes, condos, build some, or zone it for expensive commercial things, restaurants, bars, shopping, etc. So, I guess a bit of background to let you know what's going to happen. They offer Pfizer some state, and Connecticut offers state tax credits. The city offers city tax credits to help lure Pfizer to New London to try and implement this complex urban revitalization program, in hopes that'll work. Sorry, nose is itchy. Okay, so we have Pfizer. They announced in 1998, it's the time frame we're looking at, they want to build this new campus. They say they're going to have over 1,000 jobs, and this is what can happen and what a lot of people talk about happening. Pfizer opens up their campus. A lot of other biotech firms, medicine manufacturer firms, are going to want to open up businesses near that Pfizer campus so that they can communicate with each other well, easily, share resources, things like that. If you have one big company that comes into an area, oftentimes you'll have a lot of little startups, or the theory goes, at least sometimes you will have a lot of little startup companies that pop up around that one big company, because it can take advantage of the resources that are available to the big company. The smaller companies can take advantage of those resources that are already available. They have built-in talent there that they can draw from if they need to, things like that. So Pfizer's going to build this campus. Pfizer says, listen, give us some tax subsidies. We're gonna provide over 1,000 jobs, and we're gonna have all these other high-tech, high-paying biotech startups are gonna pop up around here. it's going to be a great deal for New London because you're going to have rich people coming in to staff these positions. It'll be a game changer for New London that's been suffering. And that's what a lot of people looked at it and saw it as. So what was going on with New London? New London was a city, is a city still. It had its heyday at one point. The Navy used New London as a base to build Navy ships. Very popular in World War II to crank out a bunch of Navy ships, and during the Cold War, as things started to slow down, the United States became super duper powerful. The Navy started consolidating its operations, moving construction facilities to different areas. They shut down the Navy Yard in New London. Lots of people lost their jobs, people left, and New London became an economically distressed area. And so that's why people in New London were real excited, or at least certain people in New London were real excited about this Pfizer deal. Okay? There's another key player in this. It's called the New London Development Corporation. If you remember back to part 1 of this series when we talked about the different government structures, weak mayor, strong mayor, city manager system, there's another thing in there, quasi-governmental bodies. And I talked about how the quasi-governmental body is often appointed or created by elected officials or some sort of public-private partnership created that way. And sometimes the elected officials, the city, can pass off its authority and power to that unelected quasi-governmental body. New London Development Corporation is a quasi-governmental body. What that means is it's got a couple of members on its board that makes decisions that are elected. It was given power by the officials who are elected to lead New London, to be the city council members. However, a lot of its members are not elected officials. They're local business leaders. Lawyers, bankers, CPAs, people that you would expect to be involved in this if you're following the theory of urban growth machine. And New London is great because we can tie in those theories as a concrete example of how this works. So, urban growth machine says people who are tied to the geographic location of the city will have a vested interest in its, pumping through some growth, and they're going to be involved in trying to pursue growth at all costs. And here we have New London Development Corporation, responsible by the city to help find ways to attract businesses and to grow. And who is on the board but the people that the urban growth machine would predict would be on the head of the boards, the people who are tied to the region or to the city. So here's what the city did. The city gave the New London Development Corporation, again, this is where a lot of the controversy came in, quasi-governmental, quasi-public entity. It gave them power to use the government's power of eminent domain to seize land for development. So essentially, you had an organization made up of lawyers, of bankers, of, say again, written on there, CPAs, heads of schools, newspapers. The people who had a vested economic interest in the city already, who couldn't necessarily move that economic interest elsewhere, were the ones who were leading the New London Development Corporation, and they were the ones that were given power, they were delegated the power by the city to be able to exercise eminent domain on behalf of the city and seize land and then offer payment for the land that they seize. So what did New London Development Corporation do? They go to the citizens that live in the Fort Trumbull neighborhood and they say, hey, by the way, Pfizer's building something here. We're going to take your land and we're going to give it to another private corporation or several other private corporations so they can develop it into richer condos, richer homes, high-priced boutique shops, retail stores, things like that. There was some controversy involved there. A bit in response to it, initially New London Development Corporation offered double the fair market value for the homes. So if a home was worth $150,000, they offered to buy it offered, quote unquote, to buy it for $300,000. A few of the people who held out to the very end, I think, ended up getting something like 3 to 4 times the value of their home and land. But, a lot of people took the offer. 7 people refused to sell. They refused the eminent domain grab, which is something you can do. The government can come in and take your land through eminent domain. However, you can refuse to sell, and if you refuse to sell, then the case will go to court, and the court will decide if you have to give up the land or not, essentially. And with the court deciding that, then the court and the city get to decide how much money they give you, and they'll do it based upon, again, fair market value. And if you want to then challenge the amount of money they give you, say that you are owed more, you can bring in your own appraiser and you can haggle, but eventually things get settled and the land's leaving. Land's not going to be yours anymore. Anyway, 7 of the residents refused to sell. They liked where they lived. They didn't want to move. They liked their homes. It happens with any time there's an eminent domain case, but this one was especially shocking to a lot of people because we meaning New London, wasn't taking the land to then build a beautiful community park that everyone could enjoy or to build roads that were needed. They were taking the land to then rezone it and give it to other private entities that would then use the land to make a profit off of, and that land would no longer be public. Does that make sense? So ordinarily, we think of eminent domain as being used to take private land and turn it to some sort of public use where everybody has access to it. The city is taking private land and giving it to other private people so they can use it for private purposes, for their private use, on the idea that the people they give the land to can use it better and increase the value of that land in the way that the people they took the land from did not do or could not do. So again, you have that $100,000 home and it's taxed at $100,000, all of a sudden becomes a $500,000 home that's taxed at $500, or that's taxed at $500,000, and that's more money for the city. So yay, I guess. Anyway, this went all the way to the Supreme Court. The 7 residents that refused to sell because they said the city was improperly using its power of eminent domain because they were taking the land to give it to other private people for private use as opposed to for what they considered public use. They took it to the Supreme Court and they lost. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision 5-4, that essentially they said they didn't want to become the city council for the nation. If you remember Minersville v. Gobbets, that was the case that was referenced in West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett. That was the case where the Jehovah's Witnesses couldn't say the pledge because it was violating their religion, but the Supreme Court said they didn't have to say the pledge, but it was under free speech reasons. Minersville was the case that happened 3 years earlier that actually said that laws and rules requiring Jehovah's Witnesses to say the Pledge of Allegiance were legal, were fine, and part of the reason they made that decision was they said that the Supreme Court did not want to become the school board of the nation. They did not want to have to set rules for every single school board. They didn't want all these different rules to be challenged that the school board set and get up to them under the idea that the Supreme Court has authority to make lots of decisions based upon what's fair and not fair in school boards. The idea was the school board was doing what they had the power to do, and the Supreme Court wasn't going to interfere with that, even if it was dumb. 3 years later, they overturned that, citing free speech. However, in this case, in the Supreme Court, ruled 5-4 that they were not the ones to decide what a city sort of can and cannot do with its power of eminent domain and justifying public use. They viewed that, the majority did, as kind of similar to a sort of like legislating from the bench type deal. They said they didn't want to become the city council for the entire nation, deciding every single eminent domain case. They couldn't open up that can of worms. And they felt the city had the right to, decide what was best and proper for their eminent domain use. Obviously within some constraints, but the Supreme Court looked at those constraints broadly, those to be less constraining. The very interesting thing about this case also, with the court's breakdown, it was 5-4, like I said. The 4 liberal justices and Anthony Kennedy, the conservative-leaning but swing justice, were the 5 people that ruled in favor of the city. The reason why this is interesting is we generally think of excuse me, I'm sure that's lovely to watch. As the liberals being for the little guy against big business, that since this was a case where, the little poor guy was getting his home taken away or her home taken away, in this case it was her home, taken away from them by the government, who is then not going to build a beautiful park but give it to a big private corporation so they can do stuff with it. Seems like it would be liberals against that and conservatives in favor of that if you go based upon sort of stereotypes. However, in this case, the 4 conservative members of the court ruled against the city, but they were the dissenting votes. They said that the city was not properly using its power of eminent domain. They said that they found the majority opinion troubling because they said that if we allow eminent domain to be used in this way to pass land from one person who owns that land but who isn't using it to maximize the land's value, or at least to maximize the land's value in the way the city thinks it should be maximized. And then we allow the city to take that land and give it to somebody else who they think will maximize the land's value in a way that the city likes. That's a dangerous precedent. Sandra Day O'Connor, who wrote at least one of the dissenting opinions, talked about what's to stop this continuous cycle of the city taking land from people and giving it to somebody else simply because they might be able to make more money off of it, basically. I live in an apartment right now. It's in a nice neighborhood, but extremely cheap, which is great. But you could imagine that the apartment building I live in, Winston-Salem could look at that and say, you know what? I know that apartment building is worth, I don't know, I have no idea how much it's worth. Let's say for $500,000, because there's, several apartments and stuff. But you know what? We can give it to this other person. This other person has a plan to build an even nicer apartment complex that will charge higher rents, bring in more money, attract a different level of socioeconomic level of people. So we're going to take it from you and give it to them because they have a plan to make it into something different, make it into something more expensive, higher land values, therefore higher taxes, therefore good for the city. So that's step one. The people come in, build the apartment, the $750,000 apartment. So now the land value has been increased. The thing is better for the city because it's worth more money. However, this other person comes in a year later and says, you know what? That land, I have a plan that will create 20 new jobs, and the property value of that land after I'm done with it will be worth $1.5 million. The city then goes, hey, you can get us more money. They then again use their power of eminent domain to take that land from the one person who they just recently gave it to improve it, and then give it to somebody else who's going to improve it again. Then what happens if somebody comes along and says, hey, I can make that land worth $5 million? They take it from one person, develop another. You can see maybe how that step sort of cycle progression thing could go. Sandra Day O'Connor worried what's, again, to stop the city from just taking anybody's land simply because they think somebody else could put it to better use or could make it worth more. We don't take people's land, according to her. We don't take people's land because somebody else could use it better. We take their land to satisfy some sort of greater social good. The liberal members of the justice felt that the city had justified its position that it did serve some sort of greater good. That by taking the land, offering it to developers to build more expensive stuff, it increases tax revenues. It starts the economic engine of the city going again. It gets more jobs in the city, and it allows the city to get more money than to provide new and better services to the poor people in the city. And I should say the people they kicked out were not necessarily, again, I say poor, working class. I don't think you're poor if your home's worth $150,000 and you own it. It's a pretty good chunk of change. So yeah, Supreme Court ruled though that full steam ahead. So, after several years of legal battles, they take the land. Excuse me. But here's the fun twist. Okay, so, and here's where we get into some sort of some of the power things. Pfizer says, all right, we're going to put this thing in Fort Trumbull. Then they just kind of say, hey, and you know what's going to be great about this? Sort of say this again. We're going to build this really nice new biotech campus. It's going to be really, really nice. It's going to look nice. It's going to be sleek and modern. It'd be cool if like sleek and modern things went around it. You know, like there's going to be this really sleek and modern and expensive campus, and then there's going to be these 100-year-old homes that, sure, they've been in people's families for a couple generations, and their grandparents built it with their own hands, which is literally the case for at least one of the homes. But we can't, you know, I mean, come on. They, you know, wouldn't say anything directly and didn't make it obvious, maybe, perhaps, but the implication's there, the idea's there. We're building this really nice thing. We're bringing in a lot of really high-tech people who are going to be really rich and have lots of money to spend. Do you really want them to work next to, like, you know, working class people? People who only have jobs that pay them $15 an hour? You know, the city kind of gets the hint. Takes what Pfizer says, and I actually put the quote on here. Pfizer goes, you know, we're building this facility here because we want something better for New London. We want something better for this neighborhood. And when you say you want something better, that means that whatever's there is not good enough, and what's there are some working class people. So, want something better. We want a nice place. Again, implying place isn't that nice to begin with. City takes the hint. And the New London Development Corporation really takes the hint. Take the homes to try and turn around and find somebody to develop it. So yeah. So that's how that happened. The last home was cleared in 2005. And then the city went around looking for, well, New London Development Corporation, went around looking for people to give the land to develop. They had some plans in place, but the plans fell through. It was harder to get that done than it was than they expected it to be done, and there's a really sad story coming up at the end of this. If not, this isn't already sad to some people. I don't know. Well, there's several really sad stories coming up. Okay, so November 2009, ironically, the same year that Pfizer's tax incentives run out. Also, though, November 2009, the recession's in full swing. So, a couple things happening there. Pfizer's tax bill is about to go to many millions of dollars, which is what New London was hoping for. They had delayed that tax bill for 10 years. Now they're about to get this windfall of millions of extra dollars in the city so they can help their residents. Pfizer goes, hey, by the way, sorry, somebody banged really loud upstairs. The apartment above me. Pfizer goes, hey, by the way, we're actually going to shut down and we're going to leave. And we actually have this campus also literally across the river in Groton. Is that the name of the place? Groton. Groton. If you just look directly across from New London, if you're looking at the map, there's Groton. We're just going to combine the facilities, and we're going to combine them over there. So we're leaving. So Pfizer builds this nice campus, lives there for 10 years, and then says peace out once the tax credit ends, and also when the economy is going down and people are consolidating. It moves across the river. New London loses that property taxing. Now, the thing is, not all the jobs were lost. The jobs just moved across the river. So people could still have jobs in New London, or who worked for Pfizer might still have their jobs. They just had to cross the river now and go to work in Broughton instead of working in New London. So that was kind of a little, silver lining maybe. But what happened next? So Pfizer leaves. Now the campus is empty. The area next to the campus where they bulldozed all those homes, undeveloped. Still have not been able to find anybody to come in and build the large-scale, expensive projects that they were trying to entice people to come in and build. The only thing that got built there was a government project, museum for the Coast Guard. So you can only count on the government for things, I guess. I don't know. What was the other piece of this? Oh, so the even sad thing, the place where all the homes were raised and now nothing sits there, where there used to be homes, now it's a undeveloped, empty piece of land. It's actually not that empty. Maybe it is by now, but for a while there it actually wasn't that empty because it was used as a landfill site after Hurricane Sandy went through the region, and knocked down trees, destroyed homes, things like that. They're like, we have all of this debris, all of these destroyed homes. Where can we put all this stuff? New London goes, hey, by the way, we just raised an entire neighborhood and haven't built anything there, even though we've been trying for 5, 6, 7 years now. Do you want to throw your trash here? And so that's what happened. So where there used to be homes that people lived in, now it's a junkyard. It might not be a junkyard now. They might have finally moved everything out of it, all the trash and junk. A good news situation in this story maybe. The Pfizer built that biotech campus and then left, but the campus only stayed vacant for about a year and a half or so. A new company came in and established offices in most of the buildings that Pfizer abandoned. The company is General Dynamics Electric Boat, and they do submarine boat building stuff. So at least that entire area is not abandoned now. The Pfizer buildings are up and going. Even though Pfizer's not there anymore. But there isn't any other fancy lift us up out of economic stagnation and distress that the city was suggesting. Another note about this before I go into the systemic and urban growth machine views on this. Pfizer said they bring over 1,000 jobs in cooperation with New London Development Corporation. and their economic predictions, they were like, hey, all this stuff combined could bring, if I have the exact numbers in any of my notes. Okay, yeah. Pfizer research facility and redevelopment would bring over 3,000 additional jobs, not including the 2,000 to 3,000 that Pfizer thought they would have in the research facility once it was finally up and running. So Pfizer was initially like, this is going to be a 1,000 job deal, but as we get things cranking out, as we get set up here, we're going to put 2,000 to 3,000 people to work. And then also, New London Development Corporation was like, if we destroy this neighborhood and we build shops and office space and things like that to help supplement, or that goes with Pfizer's campus, and that the people who now work at Pfizer and make lots of money can shop at, that can create, they said, over 3,000 more jobs. And this was actually also used in the Supreme Court case, and part of the reason why the court said, New London Development Corporation seems to have done research and has a reason to think that there's going to be public benefit to it. And the Supreme Court then said, we're not really going to be in the place, though, of judging whether or not the city's right on that, if it would really happen. And this is a big lesson. Whenever you hear about the positive economic impact of something and the number of jobs it'll create, always, it seems, wildly overblown. I actually have not in my entire life yet, that I can remember, seen a projection of, like, if there's a project that people are promoting and they say, if we do this project, it'll bring X number of jobs. I've never seen a project actually bring the number of jobs promised or bring the economic growth promised to an area. Example, the Super Bowl. Super Bowl committee said that they can bring $500 to $600 million of economic activity to the host city. So that's why they get the host cities to bid to bring the Super Bowl to their city. The host cities will often build things, change things around to make their city look more attractive to bring the Super Bowl. For example, Miami has had the most Super Bowls, has had more Super Bowls, hosted more Super Bowls than any other city. They haven't hosted any in a while, though, and with the recent Super Bowl in New York, first cold weather Super Bowl, Miami's gotten a little nervous about having more competition. So, in part because they want to renovate the stadium the Miami Dolphins play in anyway, but also to further justify that and to put more money into renovating the stadium the Dolphins play in. They're justifying that based upon, we need to make the stadium more attractive for the Super Bowl committee so that they'll want to bring the Super Bowl here and thus then give us that economic impact. However, no other economic study after the fact or by projections other than the Super Bowl's estimates has actually brought in anywhere, or has projected, or there actually hasn't even been brought in anywhere near the $500 to $600 million that the Super Bowl committee promises. If your city holds the Super Bowl, you'll get that. You'll have that extra money flowing into your city. It seems like, and this is where methodology is interesting, that the Super Bowl committee comes at those numbers by adding in all the money that's spent in the city, but that's spent on NFL gear. So, if people come into New York or go into New York for the Super Bowl, but they spend $400 million on NFL hats, jerseys, whatever else the NFL sells or programs the NFL puts on, that's money that's going to the NFL and leaving the city. That's not money the city's making, but the NFL is including that in there. Guess what? You're going to get $500 million out of this deal. Usually the sort of best, not best as in most accurate, but the most optimistic projections, realistic projections for how much the Super Bowl brings to a city is $60 to $90 million maybe. But there are lots of other things too that can affect that. For example, New York, they saw hotels around the Super Bowl. They actually, when the Super Bowl was in town, they saw less occupancy in the hotels than they normally would have historically on that same weekend every year beforehand. The thinking was people actually avoided New York during the Super Bowl because of the impact the Super Bowl was going to have on the city. So it actually hurt some of the hotels that it was supposed to help. Anyway, that's a bit of a side. Helps maybe look at the paper. Helps look at every public policy thing. A big one right now is the XL Keystone Pipeline. The people who are supporting that are suggesting 30 to 40 to 50,000 jobs. I wouldn't personally, in my opinion, I would not believe that for even a microsecond. It'll create some jobs. I would be shocked if it did over 10,000. Simply based upon the fact that if they're saying it's going to create 30 to 50,000 jobs, best guess, it might create a third of that. It's just kind of what it seems to go on. Anyway. So anyway, with New London, none of that stuff comes to pass that they promise. All right? So how does Urban Growth Machine come into play here? Well, we see that the New London Development Corporation is made up of the people that the Urban Growth Machine theory would predict it would be made up of, and they make decisions that Urban Growth Machine would predict they would make. They moved from they moved to take land from people where it wasn't worth much, to give it to people where it'd be worth more, to try and bring in those more jobs, drive that population growth, get that economic engine moving in the city, creating that economic growth. The city is a economic growth machine, and there are these interest groups in the city that want to keep that going. Fucking hell. So that actually fits in really well with Urban Growth Machine, explaining and predicting what people would do. If you looked at New London Development Corporation before any of this happened, and you hypothesized that Pfizer would come in and they'd plant a thing down, a biotech facility where they did, how would the New London Development Corporation respond? You would pretty much predict under Urban Growth Machine that they would respond the way they did. Systemic power. Now, generally theories aren't meant to work side by side, or it's theoretically, when people create a theory and use a model of the world, that model is supposed to explain everything. When I look at this case, though, I see both Urban Growth Machine and Systemic Power explaining very well what happens. and maybe kind of different parts of it, but still explain it very well. Systemic power. Pfizer has a lot of resources, money, jobs to the city. Their mere presence of saying that they were going to be there made the city drool, more or less, over the prospect of the resources Pfizer could bring to the city in terms of tax revenue, and made them very aware of what Pfizer might need to make its time worthwhile in New London, maybe even before Pfizer knew that it needed it. So when Pfizer's like, we want nice things for New London, we want to be a good neighbor, and we really want something better for the community, the city goes, yeah, they do, huh? Okay, let's bulldoze down this neighborhood and build something nicer, because Pfizer says they want something nicer. Pfizer never went to anybody in the city and said, hey, this neighborhood looks like crap. Can you please tear it down? I don't want it next to our shiny new buildings. They never went to the city and said, hey, if you build this, that would make us happy and we won't leave. It was that informal or inherent power that one group had over another. Pfizer, by virtue of its largesse, its huge money reserves, huge potential for job creation that the city needs and resources the city needs to be able to do its job. It has this inherent power that Pfizer never actually has to exercise. Actually exercise in terms of doing it itself. It just is power they get automatically. And it's actually very similar to white privilege, white power, not like KKK white power, but systems of power that advantage white people and males. As a white male, I don't actually have to run around and say, hey, I'm a white male, give me things. I don't want that to sound conceited. Things just kind of come to me. Not entirely like always true, but yeah, I get advantages in life and I don't have to do anything to earn it. Or fight for it or whatever, unlike some people who don't have the same privileges that I do. So Pfizer's like a white man. A real quick thoughts about the views, what's going on. Initially, people were so stoked about this idea. Newspapers were hailing it as great. This was in the early years when Pfizer announced it was going on, and they were developing this plan. There's a lot of cheerleading, a lot of this is what the city needs to get it back on track, things like that. This is going to bring social justice, increase the tax base. We're going to have a good education system. We're going to bring, as was quoted by one article, we're going to pull New London from the brink. So yay, right? Well, not really, because all of a sudden, 3 years goes on, there starts to be these Supreme Court challenges or these case challenges. People are like, hey, if we're taking private people's homes, private people's property, people's private property, and giving it to other people to use as private property, maybe that's not what we want eminent domain to be used for. And all of a sudden you start to see the tide shift against the project. And I'm going to hit the pause button there for 1 second, and then I'll be right back. And I'm back. Okay, so it was really only a second. I was just stopping it because of the software thing I need to. Anyway, tide turns against the project. People get pissed off. The Supreme Court case happens, and people are like, how could this be happening? You're taking private property from one person and giving it to another private person simply because you want somebody else to make a bunch of money off of it. That seems terrible. And when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the city, the poo hit the fan, and people were pissed. Let's see, where is the stats? Is the stat on here? Sorry, I'm trying to... Okay, basically, a lot of people were against what the New London Development Corporation did in conjunction with the city. Oh, there it is. Okay. 95% of the people opposed the Supreme Court's decision. They thought it was dumb. They did not like the precedent that was set there. After the Supreme Court made its decision, 43, maybe? 45? Again, where is it in my notes? You'll believe me if I, well, you will believe me that it's, does it really matter if it's 43 or 45 or 41 or 42? I know it's in the 40s. Anyway, this is what I'm going at. After the Supreme Court made their decision, states across the country, 40-ish states, passed laws or amended their constitution that would forbid states from doing what New London did. They said, if a city, what city is doing what New London did? If a city uses its power of eminent domain, it has to be for a public purpose in terms of a public good that's sort of shared and can't go from one private person to another private person. That's what happened. Connecticut was one state that did not do that. So yeah, that's New London. That's the case study. We see the overlapping of urban growth machine and systemic power, how they both explain what the city council did, what the New London Development Corporation did. I think it also shows that, and one thing cities are learning and we see are changing, as I talk about segment new regionalism, private economic interests simply are not that reliable. New London put a lot of effort into and a lot at stake into creating this plan, right? For the to help build this business venture or whatever to bring these jobs and stuff, and the private interests that expressed private companies that expressed interest that said they would be there, the Pfizer that said they're going to stay there, they're in there for the long haul, they're going to bring all these jobs. All that stuff never materialized. Private interest, private economic interest are just not that reliable in a lot of this sense. A lot of these senses. And it especially becomes a problem with urban planning, and urban, the way urban governments interact with each other, when in our capitalist society, they're competing for jobs to be able to do what the city does. So New London and Connecticut were throwing money at Pfizer, which makes tens of billions of dollars in profit every single year, they were giving them free money to try and make sure they built the plant in their city and in their state, as opposed to one of the other locations across the country Pfizer was looking at. So in our current urban landscape, we have these situations where cities and counties are kind of powerless against large business interests. They can't enforce a lot of regulations. They can't pass a lot of restrictions because a lot of times the business can just up and move. And the city can't afford that to happen. Now the state is in a better position to pass regulations, enforce laws, make sure the businesses are operating with the public interest in mind, because it's harder for a business to leave a state than it is to leave a city. If I'm Pfizer, I can do what I did in New London. I put my building in New London city limits. But once my tax incentives ran out, I moved literally just to the other side of the river in a new city, and I didn't really lose anything much of value. All my workers were still there. The resources were still there. The workers just had to cross a bridge, and now subject to a new jurisdiction. If I'm Honda Jet and I'm in Greensboro city limits, if Greensboro tries to come in and say, you know what, Honda Jet, I'm making this up. The way you build wings for your plane is killing 2 children every year. You cannot build your wing planes like that anymore. Honda Jet can say, okay, we will move our company, our plant, 2 miles to the north, and then we won't have to follow your rule anymore. That's how easy it is for businesses to move, and how much at the mercy a lot of urban governments are to the whims of these elite interests, rich interests, business interests, things like that. Now the state has more control, not as much control as the federal government, but the state has more control because it takes more for Honda Jet, for example, to move 2 miles north to avoid Greensboro's taxes and regulations or whatever, versus to move 100 miles north to avoid North Carolina's rules, taxes, and regulations. However, it's still possible. It's just more difficult. So the state has the ability to enforce its laws and to pass laws in the public interest more than the local government does. The federal government, though, has the ultimate ability to be on a level playing field with regards to private interests. The business cannot get upset with the federal government taxes, theoretically in general. The federal government says the national minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's not like Best Buy can move to Mexico, all of their retail stores, and be able to do business and make money or whatever, right? They'll no longer have any stores in the United States. They have to go along with the United States law. In this case, it's the government providing laws and enforcing laws instead of businesses dictating laws. However, excuse me. If the city of Greensboro says, we're going to pass an $8 an hour minimum wage, and all the business needs to do is move 3 miles to avoid that minimum wage, they might just do that. They may lose some customers. They may not lose much business, and they may not lose any business at all, depending on what they're doing and stuff. But when you have, situations like that, I hope I've repeated myself enough so that this point is clear. God, excuse me. I'm really getting tired. My voice is getting all shrill or froggy, whatever. Businesses move. Yeah, and that's the one other thing when we talk about home rule, this decentralization of federalism, moving power to the state and local governments. This is one of those consequences of it that so I don't I'm going to kind of with hesitation crap on Republicans a little bit, which may not come as much as a surprise considering what we talked about. But Republicans talk about power being closer to the people, letting states and local governments have more control over people's lives, and the federal government being so far away from the people is corrupt and doesn't pay attention and only serves powerful interests and things like that. I am really sorry that my nose is itchy. Federal government, blah, blah, blah. Here's the deal. Ideologically, no doubt, a lot of conservatives genuinely want there to be more power at the state and local level for no other reason than power should be at the state and local level. That to them just seems like it's a better situation, that people in Colorado should be able to decide what's best for people in Colorado, and people in Florida should be able to decide what's best for people all over the country, because obviously Florida is the best place in the world and they know what's best for everybody. And what I really meant to say there was that people in Florida know what's best for people in Florida. And the federal government can't come in and set a one-size-fits-all policy for everybody, if that makes sense. So there's that ideological part to it that doesn't have to have any hidden, really crappy agenda. However, I will point out that it seems awfully convenient that the party most interested in kowtowing to business interests, that are seen as being the best friends to business, that are trying everything they can do to make it so government cannot do anything to regulate business or to limit government's ability to regulate business, trying everything they can do to limit government's ability to enforce regulations. I mean, if you look at the record of the Republican Party over the past couple years and reference to gun laws, I bring this up because I mentioned it earlier. There are gun laws on the books, and they could be enforced. And the NRA is right, 100% right, that there are gun laws on the books that are not enforced. I won't necessarily make a judgment call as to if the government just enforced the gun laws that are on the books, then everything would be hunky-dory. The NRA's argument, though, is certainly, listen, there are gun laws already in place. The gun laws we have in place are fine. The only thing we need to do is enforce those gun laws. We don't need new gun laws. We just need to enforce them. Okay, fine. But guess who's involved in making sure the government does not in any way enforce those gun laws. The NRA. Analogy to the Republican Party. Yeah, sure. Government can offer some regulation and government may have some role in doing stuff. Private enterprise knows best. But, let's let local people decide what's best for them and, let the chips fall where they lie there type thing. What they're doing when they do that, though, is essentially taking away the people's ability to enact any regulations or enact many regulations against businesses, against elite interests. Because, again, if you're at the city level, if you're a business, depending on what type of business you are, just move a few feet and all of a sudden you're not subject to that rule anymore. So I guess that's my stab at the Republican Party, how it's convenient that they move. They have this ideological idea that they say is pure, that government that's local rules the best and makes the best decisions for the people and is best for society. That also, though, local governments are the ones that are easiest to take advantage of, to run roughshod over, and to make sure that none of the people's will gets done because they're so much at bay or, beholden to private interests, whereas the federal government doesn't have that same sort of pressure on them, and they can actually listen to what the people have to say and pass laws that the people quote unquote want. Anyway, all of this, politics, information, growth of the city, things like that, hopefully builds to this one slide 60. New regionalism is this idea that's taking hold that is trying to get rid of this old notion that cities should just sort of naturally automatically compete with each other for business by offering tax credits and tax incentives and things like that. Businesses have been getting lots and lots of free money from cities and states over the years because they've been able to play cities off each other. Because of the problems cities have been having with people moving out of the city to these creation of these very balkanized metropolitan areas, to the lots of situations and high-profile situations where the tax incentives the city has given to a business have gone to the business hasn't followed through on what it promised, and then the business leaves once the tax credits are gone. More and more of those high-profile cases, we see this movement towards what's been called new regionalism, which wants to see cities in an area as working together in cooperation with each other, as opposed to being in competition with each other, to create smart urban planning, smart urban growth, to not let businesses and private interests get in the way of creating good urban planning and giving away free tax dollars only to be taken advantage of later. The other thing this new regionalism does, and I think I talked about this in one of the examples in one of the papers, like maybe it was in the research paper instruction sheet. It challenges this idea that the city should be or should consist of this discrete geographic boundary, and that's all a city is. Discrete meaning a concrete, a well-defined boundary. The city of Greensboro has defined city limits, that is, it has jurisdiction, and it doesn't have jurisdiction outside of those city limits. But that's an old way of looking at cities. That's based upon this even, 15th, 16th, 17th century notion that economic activity takes place within a city, and the economic activity that takes place within a city can't move just outside of the city, just outside of the political boundaries that a city has, to avoid any sort of regulation or taxes or anything like that. So it's this idea that we're going to move, or this attempt to create some type of structure that moves from looking at cities as geographic boundaries, but instead view them as having geoeconomic boundaries. So a city's boundaries would be the boundaries where the economic activity takes place, sort of within the city's metropolitan region. And so you would then have a regional board, some sort of governing body that can adapt and change to the changing population shifts in a city's area, economic activity, to make sure that the will of the people, I guess on a whole, is, say, enforced on the businesses, that businesses and any economic activity cannot escape government oversight and government regulation, proper government taxes, simply by moving it out of the city jurisdiction. If we think of city jurisdictions as being economic boundaries instead of geographic boundaries, then it makes it much more difficult for that economic activity to move, to leave. The ability to be regulated, to have rules applied to it. Think of it, are people aware, I'm asking this totally to y'all, are people aware of like the idea of international waters? There are international waters, and this at least is the mythology of it. There is no law or rule applied to international waters because nobody owns it. So, if I decide I want to sell drugs to somebody, I want to sell cocaine to somebody, if I do it at the dock in Wilmington, I can get arrested by the United States government. If I drive a boat out with a friend of mine who's going to buy the stuff out to international waters, nobody has jurisdiction theoretically out there. I can sell him the cocaine, and it's totally cool because nobody can do anything about it because I'm not in anybody's jurisdiction. I don't know exactly how true that is. I know there's some rules and regulations in international waters. But the idea is there. There are lots of things that are more permissible in international waters that aren't in a place where a state has jurisdiction over. So think of the city as a country and the area surrounding the city that's not incorporated as international waters. And so if a business can go from the dock, Greensboro and Wilmington and I-40 is a place that's located inside of Greensboro, like in that general area where like that Target is. It's a little further down. There's a Walmart there, Lowe's and Home Depot. You're in the United States or Greensboro's jurisdiction. If I'm a business there, I can move one exit down I-40 on Guilford College Road, then I think it's like maybe half a mile south on Guilford College Road. All of a sudden, I'm in, quote unquote, international waters. I'm not in the city of Greensboro's jurisdiction, and therefore, I don't have to pay Greensboro taxes anymore. I don't have to follow any of Greensboro's laws with regards to, I don't know if they have ordinance on pollution or noise or minimum wage stuff, or how high the grass can be or something. So yeah, but if we start to think of cities as having flexible boundaries based upon economics, then it makes it harder for businesses to avoid, and that's the sort of new idea in urban politics. It's a new idea. It's called new regionalism. Attempt to solve the problem. And that's it for that case study, for a lot of that urban political theory. I did this a lot more in depth than I'm going to go over it in class. I think it'll be easier to explain in class because I'll have feedback as to if people are understanding me. I'm going to do one more. If you happen to be watching this would be the third version or the third part. If you happen to be at the end of the third part, there will be a fourth part, and it will then, that part will incorporate race relations, racism, and how that has played a huge role in the development of cities. Right now we've looked at the politics and economics independent of race, which is something you can't actually really do. And if you've noticed, there's been some trouble maybe there explaining it because there's always an extra part of the story. The racial component is very, very important in a lot of these stories, and a lot of the decisions that get made. And so it's something that, it's important to talk about, to be educated and blah, blah, blah. So yeah. But I'm going to do that later. My brain is shutting down. It is early in the morning. I have to be up soon. And so I'll get this uploaded, send people an email, let them know it's there. And I'll probably do the race part, if not Sunday night, sometime Monday, maybe after class, and we'll do women's politics during class next week also. And I'll do a video on that, and you'll get exam guides and etc. Hope everybody's sleeping tight. Cool. Bye.